So Renée is an associate professor at the Université de Saint-Boniface in Winnipeg, Canada. She's the author of Translation and Social Media in Theory, in Training and Professional Practice, and co-editor of When Translation Goes Digital, Case Studies and Critical Reflections. And I would even say TS influencer, right? Digital influencer, probably. I think I do not exaggerate when I say that. And today she will talk about the social relevance of translation, from reach and engagement to life and death. So Renée, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you so much. As if I wasn't tall enough, I put my heels on and now I'm just disrupting. Okay, thank you. So good morning, everyone. It's so lovely to see a full room. I'm so honored and delighted to be here today. When I was here in 2023 as a presenter, I just felt so much warmth and such a welcoming environment. So to be invited as one of the keynote speakers is just, I mean, I knew you were the one, all of you. So I'm really happy to be here. I want to thank the organizers, especially Martin, for all of their hard work. And I really want to give a shout out to the student organizers and volunteers who have done tremendous work. I have been looking at their social media and I am just so impressed. So kudos. I also want to thank the interpreters who will have to work very hard to interpret me because there's a lot of contemporary terminology and I tend to speak very fast. So interpreters, I have eyes on you. If you need me to slow down, just give me a little wave. I sent them my notes very late, so I'm so sorry. This is really a challenge. Well, you'll tell me if it's a challenge. So this is also work in progress today, and I really want this presentation to be a conversation. So I'm really looking forward to your feedback, your questions, your critical insights. It's not meant to be me just pontificating. That's not the vibe, as the kids would say. So the roadmap for today's talk, so I've divided it into 4 parts. And instead of starting with what we'll say is more of a theoretical component, I thought I'd jump right into a personal example. I really liked Barbara's introduction, where she was talking about being guardians and activism and social justice. And I'm going to try and pull some of those strands into my presentation. Then I want to talk about relevance, and this will be the more theoretical component. Hopefully you've had your coffee and you can stay with me. And then we'll move into another section, another example, and then we'll do some conclusions. So what do we stand to lose with AI and technological disruption? So I'm going to talk about a deeply personal example. And this is because I think it's important to make our research personal. I think there was a time where scientific inquiry was very disembodied, very impersonal. And I think that's shifting. I think it's important to include research activism, researcher positionality, researcher subjectivity. And so that's what I'll try to do with this example. But before we get into the example, I thought we'd start with some memes. So this is how I've been feeling about AI. I don't know if this resonates with you, but I feel that we are just being bombarded with a lot of AI hype, a lot of AI information, and it feels a bit overwhelming. The problem with the inundation of AI hype is that there's a hyperfixation on AI itself. It's almost as if we're focused on the tree and not the forest. There are many elements that come in to AI, and yet we're just focused on the hype. This has been a discourse that has progressed and has gone from what the possibilities of tech could afford us to the inevitability of tech to full-blown tech solutionism. Fundamentally, the issue is so long as we continue to have people problems, we're going to need people solutions, not tech solutions, or exclusively tech solutions. Now you might say, but Renée, You built a career being a social media and tech enthusiast. Now you seem to have changed your position and you're a bit more critical. And that's a fair remark. However, a lot has changed over the last 15 years. And although there has always been concern about corporate tech overreach, I have also seen many facets of the social internet, and I don't believe social media is inherently good or bad. I think the truth lies somewhere in between. The problem that we have is that now we have a group of tech oligarchs and billionaires who think they can keep creating flashes in the pan and extracting from users, and that users will still follow and opt in. However, users are more critical of tech than they once were, especially now. Another point I'd like to raise is how many in translation studies and in the language industry seem to think that AI is a completely different technology than social media, when in reality, they're deeply intertwined. To understand many of the issues with AI, you and we need to understand, you and we need to understand that the social internet and much of the data that feeds today's large language models and AI systems are fed with content from platforms like Reddit, Meta's platforms, and as of November 2025, for those that didn't know, your data on LinkedIn will now be feeding Microsoft's AI systems. So I am a tech proponent, I am a tech enthusiast, but I don't believe in tech solutionism for all human problems, and I don't believe in tech determinism. In other words, I don't think technology is inevitable. And I think from what I heard this morning with the introductory remarks, we're on the same page. The other comment that I would like to make is that we often hear this discourse of being left behind. And I want to question that. Who benefits with this discourse of saying people are going to get left behind? We have to think about different tech adopter categories. So usually when people adopt tech, they fit into one of these categories: innovators, early adopters, early majority, late majority, and laggards. That's kind of the typical categorization. What's interesting in the literature is that there isn't a separate category for people who refuse to opt into tech for very legitimate, founded, and judicious reasons. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is this new category of people pushing back, not because they don't want to adapt, not because they're not flexible. I think we're all flexible and adaptable in this room. I've heard some people do yoga, so, I think we can adapt, but it's more, do we want to and should we? I think that's the question. Yeah, who stands to benefit? What's also interesting is if we think about, I'm gonna bring us back about 15 years ago, the early days of social media, kind of when Facebook came around. Nobody was talking about getting left behind by Facebook. Like, that wasn't as strong of a discourse as what we're seeing with AI. People were like, you can do Facebook if you want, you should. That's where people are talking. But nobody was like, you're going to get left behind, the industry's changing, even though social media did disrupt quite a bit of our communicative practices. What I feel is happening, and this isn't something that I've studied extensively, so it's as much of a discussion point, if you will. But I feel that there was a generation and a type of user that didn't jump onto the social media bandwagon and did kind of feel left behind as time went on. And so now these people are on different social platforms, be it LinkedIn or Facebook or whatever. And they're the ones that start talking about getting left behind because they felt that with social media. I also think tech companies know that there are generations of users that they feel fearful of getting left behind. And so by playing on that fear, they can get people to opt in. So I think that tech companies have an incentive to use fear-based hype. Now I'm going to share a second meme. I'm sorry, this is so small. I thought it would show up bigger, but this is actually 2 posts from the platform Threads. I don't know if there are many Threads users here. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, now X, I left. I was a huge and frequent user of Twitter, especially academic Twitter. I was there for quite a bit. But with the takeover, and I do call it a takeover, I couldn't justifiably stay. So I was trying to find other platforms that kind of mimicked the Twitter ecosystem. And I would argue that Threads is probably the closest answer, but I don't think the academic community is very active there, fortunately or unfortunately. So anyways, that's where these 2 posts come from. And so the top one is from Meta, and it says POV, point of view, you missed the northern lights in real life, so you made your own with Meta AI. In response, Ryan Mack, who's a tech journalist, posts a picture of Zuckerberg in Paris using kind of metaverse-like iconography and imagery, and it's as if Zuckerberg is saying, quote, "This is amazing, just like my visit to Paris." Now I'm going to use this as the transition into my personal example. I think we can all agree that experiencing the Northern Lights in person is significantly better than experiencing it through the lens of something like the metaverse. I'm from Canada. I can tell you we have beautiful Northern Lights. And I just can't imagine a version that would look like this Parisian metaverse. Interpreters, are we okay? Good, okay. Sorry, I just have to scroll down on my notes here. I will admit there's a little bit of jet lag. Okay, so these 3 pictures are my own. This is actually me in the photos. I'm an avid trail runner, an outdoor enthusiast. I absolutely love nature. It has profoundly changed my life. I wasn't always an outdoor enthusiast. I was a city slicker for a long time. And then I discovered the mountains through a longtime friend and became an avid trail runner since. So this is the Ontario Trail. It's 65 kilometers long, and it spans the border between the province of Manitoba, which is where I live, and Ontario, which is the neighboring province. It's located in Whiteshell Provincial Park on Treaty 3 territory, which is the homeland of the Anishinaabe people and other Indigenous groups. None of these photos have been retouched. There's no filter, nothing. I don't know about you, but I think they're really pretty. And to have experienced this with my own eyes, my own body, to know this trail intimately, I have trail ran it many times, point to point, 65 kilometers. And these are the nicer sections, but there are sections where your face is like literally in the trees, there's poison ivy, there's mosquitoes. It's not an easy trail by any means, but it means a lot to me. This summer, in the spring and summer of 2025, the Ontario burnt down. This trail no longer exists, at least not in the way that I have known it over the past 10 years. And there is no rebuilding the Ontario Trail. Sure, nature, will regenerate. There will be new trees, new plants, but something that we have known for years we'll never get again. And so I think this is tremendous loss. So I'm not normally one to talk about my personal life too openly in professional settings, but I believe this really illustrates some of the ideas and concepts I'm hoping to impart with this talk. Climate activists argue that one of the best ways to engage in lower stakes climate activism that still has impact is to go out and spend time in nature. In what follows, I hope to illustrate this point and also connect it with translation studies and our professional translation practice. And there's also been a shift in translation studies to talk about translation and the environment and translation as it relates to climate crisis. So here a nod to not only Michael Cronin, but Michael Cronin's eco translation and all the work that came from that. So I also want to talk about how the Manterio ties in with my translation practice. When I was here 2 years ago, I talked about this example, so I'm not going to go into too great detail, but I collaborated with a social media influencer who wrote a travel guide and hiking book for the Manitoba trails, and the Manterio was included in that book. Now, originally, she was thinking of having her social media content and her products translated by machine translation. And I approached her to say, why would you use a machine when you could use a human, obviously, right? And so she was like, well, listen, I don't think that I can pay you, for the work. I'm a small influencer and I'm not looking to make profit with this. Would you be willing to maybe work for free? And I said, I'm in a position where I can do the work pro bono, that's fine. But what's important for me would be for you to talk about translation as being part of an accessibility or an accessible approach to the outdoors, because that's what this influencer was interested in doing, was making the outdoors more accessible. So that's why she had these books. And so she would talk about trails that were more accessible for people with mobility issues. She would talk about, trails that were free or didn't require like an entry fee. But the question of linguistic accessibility never really came up. And there's a Francophone community in Manitoba that could have benefited from a French version of her content. And so that's what I proposed to do, was to translate her content into French. And it was a really great partnership. So automated machine translation, or AI, is not sentient. For all of its ability to translate the @Hike Manitoba content adequately, because machine translation can do a good job, AI translation can do a good job, it's not a replacement for the sort of connection a human translator can establish between the content and the end users. To use some wordplay, in this example, machine translation can take a hike, but it can't actually hike. The human translator can, and this experiential and embodied knowledge makes all the difference. I have experienced the Manterio Trail. I've hiked a lot of the trails and ran a lot of the trails in Manitoba. So when I'm translating, I have that embodied and experiential knowledge that I can put into my work. The machine can only give us that Zuckerberg version, right? It doesn't know what 65 kilometers of trail feels like when you're literally swallowing mosquitoes, right? That's what I can bring to the table. That's what we can bring to the table. So, as I said, in the spring and summer of 2025, the Manterio burned, and the trail as I have known it, and other Manitobans and Ontarians have known it, no longer exists. Fires raged across Manitoba, primarily in the eastern and northern parts of the province, eradicating entire ecosystems. 2025 is the worst year on record for wildfires. As of August 7th, 1.55 million hectares of land had burned. These fires were not some hypothetical for Manitobans. Climate crisis for Manitobans was not a fictitious scenario. Not only did we lose iconic trails like the Manterio, but for many people, especially Indigenous communities in more rural and northern parts of the province, people lost their homes, their communities, and their way of life. But what we also stand to lose in cases like Manitoba is not just the fauna and the flora, it's the communities that have ensured their survival and the revitalization of some Indigenous languages. When these people are displaced in crisis because these Indigenous communities had to be transported or moved to other cities while their communities literally burnt to the ground, and cultural communities are broken apart, we stand to lose language ecosystems too. This loss can be temporary on a smaller scale, but in some cases, especially with Indigenous languages with so few speakers, the loss can be wider ranging and longer lasting. All of this intersects with strands of translation studies on eco-translation and translation in climate crisis. And here I'd like to give a nod. There is a current call for papers for the journal Target that has a special issue on climate crisis, climate activism, and translation. So let's get into, oh, sorry, I forgot to click the slide here. So on the right there, that's a map of Canada with all of the current active fires. And where you see the most coloration is the province where I live and the regions that I've just described. And you can see like the photo on the left, that's what parts of the province looked like. The air quality was absolutely horrible. We were wearing masks just like during the pandemic. People had to stay in their homes. It was really devastating. Okay, so let's get into social relevance. So that brings me to the topic of today's talk and the conference theme, which is not only about doing research, but and about being visible as a translator or making translation visible, or even putting humans in various technological loops. What I would like to talk about is doing relevance. And I say doing because it's an active engagement and active process. Doing relevance is more than talking about research relevance and outcomes in the way that we do when filling grant applications. It's a deliberate approach, dare I say, an activist approach, and I don't think that's a bad term. It's a way to engage with citizens in a number of arenas to show why translation is socially relevant at a time of climate, tech, and human crisis, as Barbara was talking about with some of the polarization that we've experienced during the pandemic and since. Here I'd like to show 3 examples of where I did media outreach and used various forms of translation to also position translation and translation studies as socially relevant for all citizens. And here, it's not that I want to toot my own horn and say, I'm so great, look at my media appearances, I'm such an influencer. That's not it. But again, just pulling my own personal experience. And I know that there are people in the room that have done similar outreach. And I think this is really the work that we need to do to show our social relevance. So I did 3 different interviews. The top 2, so on the left, was a French language interview with a radio show called L'Actuel, and that's me trail running once again. And then on the right was an interview with CBC Manitoba, which is the English version. Those 2 interviews were essentially me translating my experience of the Ontario to citizens who wanted to know what happened with the trail burning and reminiscing about the trail. I did the interview in both official languages, so I was also effectively self-translating, right? But all of this experience brings me to an interview that I did as a translation studies professor and as a professional translator, where I was invited to talk about the Manitoba wildfire crisis. And what happened with that is that early on in the crisis, there was, the provincial government declared a state of emergency. Usually when there is a state of emergency, there's an alert that goes out to the public. This alert was only in English, no other languages. Now for a European audience, that must sound absolutely wild. In Canada, it's not unusual to have monolingual English-only crisis communications. However, as I described earlier, some of the regions that were affected by these wildfires touched Indigenous communities and French-speaking communities. So the fact that these alerts were not translated posed a problem. So I was invited by Le Desjardins Manitoba to talk about that. And during the interview, I was asked, well, do you think AI could be used to translate these emergency alerts? That way, maybe it might be faster, easier, cheaper, all the arguments that we know to have these alerts available multilingually. And I said, let's think about that for a moment. You are asking me and us if we should use the very technology that creates these forest fires in the first place. How is that a solution? Yes, arguably, it provides a solution for language accessibility, but it also creates the problem that we're trying to solve. So I think this is something that we need to think about with AI is, sure, we might be solving one problem, but then it also creates the problems that we're trying to, so it's like this snake eating its tail, if you will. Yeah. So let's talk about relevance. And this is the more theoretical part. So if you have your coffee ready, that's when you'll need it. So in the introduction to the co-edited volume by Freeth and Trevino, given that Venuti's, the translator's invisibility, serves as the closest thing to an academic bestseller the discipline has ever seen in recent history, I think we need to problematize the invisibility, the concept of invisibility, and move towards the idea of relevance. An issue we can take up with the concept of invisibility, and I bracket it because I recognize that it's these two concepts inspired by Venuti's work, is that the discourse can come across as one of language professionals being perpetual victims. Although it's true that translators and other language professionals have historically been subject to various forms of erasure or subjugation, this doesn't always register with non-translators or those outside of the profession, the academy, or the industry. Moreover, as Ton-King Lee suggests, this discourse of victimization has led to a hypercorrection that amounts to idealizing translators and translation, or what Lee calls translatophilia, translatophilia, which is a sort of uncritical valorization of translators. The optics for the general public are then that translators are either victims or translators are navel-gazing gods. In either case, I'd suggest this doesn't always engage the public in a socially meaningful way or in the ways that we might be seeking. So don't get me wrong, I think it's really important that we be visible, that we be able to self-represent. But I would argue, and you can tell me if you feel differently, that sometimes we fall into this woe is us, we're underpaid, we're valued, whatever it might be. And my experience, especially in some of the freelance work that I've done, as I mentioned with the Hike Manitoba example, I actually don't feel that my clients disrespect me or undervalue me. I actually think those relationships are quite positive. So I don't really like the victimization discourse, but I also don't like the hypercorrection where we seem to say that we have solutions for everything, because arguably we don't, right? So it's kind of how to find that sweet spot. And I think this idea of social relevance is really it. It's engaging with citizens and saying, this is why translation matters for you, right? How it can assist in some of these crises that we're facing. I should have prepared my notes differently. I apologize. Okay. So we'll be shifting into another gear. So doing relevance and social relevance beyond academic and research contexts. So we'll define what is meant by relevance, why this matters for translation studies, and also the language industry, and why this seems like a more effective discourse framing compared to the concept of visibility, invisibility. So defining relevance and social relevance. In response to growing social, ecological, and health-related challenges, scientists or researchers are increasingly expected to demonstrate the societal relevance of their work. I think for anybody who's written a research grant, you know exactly what this refers to. However, we need to de-silo that beyond the academy. More and more, relevance is becoming a formalized requirement for research to be accountable in society, and being accountable to society is one aspect of social relevance. Relevance is not an inherent property of knowledge. It is achieved through various practices. So that's why I say doing relevance instead of just saying being relevant. Therefore, relevance isn't a given, it's enacted. So what does doing relevance mean, or what does it look like? So Renée and al. Have 4 different categories, and I've added a 5th. The first is relevance as selecting and reorienting research topics and disciplines. I think we've done that with turns in translation studies. Relevance is engaging social actors and conducting user-driven research. And this is where I'll be focusing my attention in the next example. Relevance is rearranging the interaction between science and policy. Relevance is transforming academic institutions. And relevance is pushing against the idea that research should be exclusively in the service of economic growth. And this is the danger of falling back on industry all the time to justify our relevance. So how to engage societal actors? I would argue through participatory processes, so outreach, that engage different audiences, not just stakeholders, but all taxpayers are stakeholders, so all citizens. And we can do this through workshops, through community-based collaboration, strategic alliances with industry, but not exclusively, co-production of knowledge and research, social media-based science communication, and other forms of knowledge translation. So those interviews that I presented earlier, that's a form of the science communication and knowledge translation that I'm referring to here. So, and there is momentum within translation studies. So we've seen research on self-representation, notably on social platforms. We've seen engaging the public through outreach. So for example, David Orrego Carmona, who was here 2 years ago, he's done a lot of work publishing on The Conversation, relaying what we do in translation studies to make it relevant for various citizens. He talked about a lot of audiovisual translation, notably when there was the whole scandal around the Squid Game translations. There's also research momentum and outreach momentum with social movements and activism. Here I'll say to Raul Colon Rodriguez, who has looked at the Maple Spring movement in Canada, for example, but there's others as well. Social relevance of translation through consultancy on policy and legal frameworks. Maria Cordova Serrano, who's a Canadian colleague, she's been looking at policy in Montreal for public health communication during the pandemic and post-pandemic. So hopefully that gives you an idea as to what I mean when we say social relevance and doing relevance. So the key is not just to de-silo translation studies or work on interdisciplinary projects within academic contexts or partner with industry. That keeps human translators and interpreters stuck in the same loops that we've been in for quite some time. The goal is to do relevance while engaging the social agents that stand to support human and humane translation in newer arenas. Okay. That's the end of the theoretical portion. We'll try to jazz it up a little bit. So I wanted to show how we might think of translation's relevance and doing relevance in the creator economy, which is my current research work. Okay, so I have a little video for you. Tech team, if you could, I'm just gonna give it. Sorry. I just want to give a brief little introduction to this. So perhaps you're familiar with mega creator Mr. Beast. So he's very well known. He's on all platforms, but YouTube is primarily where he makes his bread and butter. And what makes Mr. Beast one of the most popular and most profitable influencers is that he's very good at identifying trends and optimizing his content for engagement. About 2 years ago, Mr. Beast discovered dubbing. He realized that his English-only content was not going beyond the Anglosphere. And he was like, I want to reach people in other languages. How might I do that? So he discovered dubbing. So now he's one of the biggest proponents of multilingual digital communication and dubbing on social media. Now, there's a couple of interesting things in this particular clip that I want us to come back to. I'm just going to set it up this way. Originally, Mr. Beast was all about AI dubbing. He was all about the machine. So think about that as we watch this video. Okay, so first of all, normal languages. I think we could do some outreach to refine that terminology, but we'll let that one slide. What's really interesting here is that Mr. Beast has shifted his playbook. Instead of relying on machines, what is he now doing? He's reaching to other multilingual creators to effectively be his voice. And it's a win-win for both creators because they both position themselves within the same piece of content. Now, here's what's also interesting. We keep hearing that AI should be what dubs, subs, and translates. And yet, the thought leaders that are making a lot of bank, a lot of money, are actually now turning to humans because they realize the value of authenticity and human output. So I think if Mr. Beast has gone to human translation when he started from machine translation, that's telling us something. Taylor Lorenz is an American or US-based tech journalist. Perhaps some of you might know her. She's, if you're looking to follow somebody who's on the up and up of tech trends and the creator and influencer economy, she's one of the most well-known journalists in this space. She is not an uncontroversial figure, however, and so she's been doxxed, trolled, and cyberbullied by a lot of tech bros and also the, we'll say more right-wing creators, but not exclusively. So I just want to mention that she's not without issue, but she's somebody that I have found very useful if you're interested in social media studies or the creator and influencer economy. Earlier this year, she reported that the global influencer era is upon us. And what she was reporting on was other creators, not just Mr. Beast, being increasingly interested by translation, interpreting, subbing, dubbing, et cetera, because creators wanted to go outside of their niches and reach other markets. So this was just the headline, but just to say that that translation is very much trending within the creator and influencer economy. I don't know if you are familiar with this person. Does anybody know who this is? Maybe students? No? Okay, another key figure. So often we hear about Mark Zuckerberg, but this is Adam Mosseri, who's essentially Zuckerberg's right-hand man for Instagram. So this is the head of Instagram. In August of this year, he announced that Meta was paying attention to global influencers wanting to, yes, okay, thank you. So Adam Mosseri was paying attention to creators and influencers asking for more tools to help them translate their content so that they could reach more audiences and obviously monetize their content. So in 2024, there was a soft launch of the Meta AI translation feature on Instagram, only in English and Spanish, normal languages, right? However, if we think of the geopolitical context in the US, it makes sense that it would be English and Spanish that would be launched first, but that's not unproblematic. Anyways, so this, when the feature was soft launch, it was only for creators that already had a certain number of followers. So it wasn't launched to all the users on the platform. This year, in August 2025, the feature was rolled out for all users. However, when I say all users, it's only users with a public-facing account. So an account that's public and open. Let's think about that for a moment. Why would Meta, why would Instagram have an incentive of making this available to only public accounts? Extractivism. If people have public-facing accounts and they're producing multilingual content, that content can be extracted. More extraction, more refining of the large language models and the AI tool. So creators are in a bit of a bind, right? On the one hand, they want to remain relevant and reach different audiences. They want to monetize, but then they also have to give ostensibly their labor for free. And if you have a private account, you don't have access to this feature. So if we talk about AI as being something meant for language accessibility or multilingual communication, how is this solving that problem, right? You're kind of gatekeeping and creating asymmetries within the creator economy. So I want to give another example of me doing relevance. So this is Melissa Urban. She is the CEO of a health brand called Whole30. And she's an American influencer with 357,000 followers. I've been following her for a while. I'm not trying to endorse her products whatsoever. However, the reason that I bring her up is that when there was that soft release of Meta AI translation on Instagram, she was one of the first influencers that I followed who actually opted in and started producing bilingual videos in English and in Spanish. And so I said to myself, I have to reach out to her and talk about why this is problematic. I need to use what Lynn Bowker's terminology, a little bit of machine translation literacy. So, so she and I had a conversation about AI and AI translation. For the sake of expediency, I won't show you the whole conversation, but I'm going to show you what she said to me. So the first thing, and I want to talk about methods here, when we do social media research, often we think that we can just share what users share with us. That's not exactly how it goes. So I have consent to present this to you today. She told me, you can feel free to quote me by name and my position as CEO of the Whole30. So that's why I talked about the Whole30. It's not that I'm trying to plug it, but that was her request in order for me to share this conversation. Take anything from what I've shared here or in the comments. So originally I said to her, oh, you're using this feature. How do you like it? You know, tell me about it. I think there are a few issues with this technology and I would like to get your insight as a creator. So these were the positive comments that she shared with me, the reasons that she felt this tool was really good for her. So I had said that there were some issues with AI. So she says, I totally understand this perspective, and I'm so glad you're sharing this with me. Yes, I do think there might be some mistranslations because I said machines, you know, can produce hallucinations and errors. And with brand-specific language that doesn't have a clear direct translation, it could be iffy in spots, absolutely. I look at things like this, I look at this like I look at live closed captioning for a news program. So here we see somebody who's equating translation and closed captioning, right? So we need to be doing a little bit of outreach on that too. Is it correct 100% of the time? Nope. Can the viewer almost always figure out what they're saying? Definitely. That's putting a lot of responsibility on users though. And the benefits of the accessibility, right, language accessibility, outweigh the risk of mistranslations or clunky translations here and there. I think we can easily nuance this, but I let her roll with it. I do worry a lot about AI replacing creators. And here, what I had said to her was translators are creators. So if you don't want to be replaced by AI as a creator, how do you think translators feel? So I do worry about AI replacing creators, whether it's copywriters, graphic designers, or translators. I think we're figuring out that AI can get you halfway there, but if you don't let a human finesse it, post-editing, it sounds like AI and it's clunky and awkward and so easy to spot. I hope that applies to the translation field too, where for quick jobs like a throwaway reel, let's be honest, most of my reels are forgotten in a day or two, can utilize the tech, but for more important or evergreen jobs, we'll always use a real human being. So that was reassuring. Again, the hype discourse, AI is going to replace everybody. Here we have creators saying, no, like we'll use real or human translators. Case in point, the cohort live video series has hearing impaired folks, and rather than using closed captioning, we hired 2 ASL interpreters for every event to ensure participants grasp the full context of the discussion and don't feel left behind. We really are thinking about it at Whole30, and I very much appreciated the added context and your expert thoughts here. So then I exchanged with her a few more issues related to AI, saying that our labor, both as creators and translators, was being exploited and without our consent. And so she replied this: the point about people's labor and expertise being exploited by AI without their consent is a really fair one. I'm not sure I would have applied it to these kinds of auto translations. To be honest, I don't think most people are aware of the environmental impact of AI. I've only heard kind of vaguely how those two are connected. And now, admittedly, I have to do some research. I really appreciate this conversation. You've opened my eyes to a lot of important points. And of course, this discourse is really important to what we do at Whole30. So here's an arguably big influencer who wasn't necessarily thinking about all of the aspects related to using AI translation, who now hasn't used Meta's AI translation feature since. So I think that's telling. One little conversation, influencer to unknown translator, and she has decided to step away from doing this in her reels because she sees that there are some issues that don't reflect the values of her business and don't reflect her values as a human. But she needed to know that information. And if you don't know where to go, how can you know? Now, that's not to say that she won't ever use this feature, but I think she will do so in a way that's perhaps more critical and not just because Meta AI is forcing it down her throat. Which brings me to the conclusion before the 10-minute sign comes up. Okay, so what now? Okay. So it's easy to be seduced by AI and to feel persuaded by the hype, but we can't forget what we stand to lose. And here, when I say what we stand to lose, I'm talking about the environment, the planet. And not exclusively climate, of course. Ultimately, so long as we have our brains, no one's getting left behind. This is the other piece of, the AI hype discourse, is that if we don't have AI, oh my gosh, what will we do? Well, it's not like our brains are suddenly going to fall out of our skulls. Like, we've been able to think for some time. So I think, we can not get too worried about that. Human translation is an embodied experience, which often means it's more humane. Doing relevance means being relevant beyond funding agencies, beyond the industry, beyond the academy. It's de-siloing multilingual communication and making it relevant for all citizens. Relevance takes us away from the pitfalls of victimization and translatophilia. If the environmental and ethical issues don't persuade you to reconsider AI, pay attention to the trendsetters, right? So I talked about Adam Mosseri, Mr. Beast, Taylor Lorenz. They all say that human multilingual communication is central to reach and authenticity, not AI. So why would we, as language and communication professionals, default to AI now? And for the students and the early career researchers in the room, there is a future for you, I promise you. As we say in the Canadian prairies, this isn't my first rodeo. When Facebook came around, right, we were told that things would be different. When Wikipedia came around, we were told, that things would be different. And sure, things did change, but like we were saying earlier this morning, we're all still here. So I think the profession will shift, right? But my experience, especially with fellow creatives like creators and influencers, there is work. I have done some of that work, pro bono because I'm in a position to do so, but I can assure students and ECRs that there is opportunity, and it's often connecting with people who have those values of remaining human and being humane. And I think Melissa Urban is a really good example of that as a CEO of a very successful business who is really willing to change her communicative strategy, her brand strategy, to be more human and humane. So I guess I will leave it at that. Thank you for being so patient and so generous with your time. I hope that this was thought-provoking, and I look forward to your questions. I'm also happy to send my slides. I do have a list of selected references if anybody would like that, and of course, all of my contact information. So if you want to find me on social media, I'm primarily on LinkedIn. Not that I want to plug that, but if you do want to stay in touch, and then there's also my professional pages. I am not, as I said, on X. I have tried Blue Sky to not so great of a success, and Mastodon, I think everybody has kind of left. But anyways, tell me where you are and I'll try to find you, and I hope we can stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Renée, for your fantastic talk. Actually, I was thinking about Wednesday. Do you know Wednesday, like this TV series? And she was talking about phobia of being included instead of FOMO. So this is what I was thinking about when you were talking about social media and some people not wanting to be included.
Yeah, actually, I think that's a really good point. If I can just briefly jump off of that, I think that's exactly it. There's also a culture of the fear of missing out that has amplified. And I think that really ties into AI hype, where it's like, oh my gosh, you'll be missing out if you don't use this. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of questions. There's the first one, Pavel, please.
Thank you very much, Renée, and it was excellent. And a question that pops to mind is that what I'm afraid, and I think what we see early signs emerging, at least here in Europe, and I know the situation is in Canada, is that this AI hype is so powerful that it convinces students in secondary schools not to opt for translator and interpreting careers, because there is this general widespread belief that these professions will no longer be needed. And we see many, influential people, influencers on the social media promoting AI and these tools that you have highlighted so well. I think that your work is excellent in explaining them why we are important. And do you think that perhaps this needs to be replicated more to those influencers that are effective for teens, for people who are at the age when they choose their university studies? Because perhaps these are the people that we need to influence, because the scenario that I'm afraid of most is that we will not be replaced by ubiquitous AI because it will be so good, but we might be replaced by ubiquitous AI because there will no longer be interpreters and translators because people stop studying this field.
Yeah, thank you. That's very good points. So I don't know what's being done across Europe, but I know that in Canadian universities, to kind of promote enrollment in various programs, there's often open house activities at different universities where students from high school can come and look at different programs and interact with faculty and ask about, job prospects and these sorts of things. And for a time, the way that we presented translation and interpreting in Canada was like, you'll work for the bureau, you'll work for the Federal Bureau, right? And for a time, I think that was seductive for students because the Bureau paid well. And you could travel, you could meet politicians, so there was kind of an appeal of prestige of that. However, now that has no currency whatsoever with students. If that's what we're presenting them, like that kind of bureaucratic apparatus is no longer of interest. And so I think one of the things that we can do is in these kinds of recruitment activities is to speak the language of our prospective students. So when I tell my students, hey, do you know, or like prospective students, high schoolers who come in, like, hey, do you know Mr. Beast? And they're like, oh yeah, of course I know Mr. Beast, like super cool. Okay, well, Mr. Beast, does dubbing and subbing. And so if you're interested in what Mr. Beast is doing, now granted, he does some problematic stuff too. What influencer isn't problematic? But if you're interested in some of the multilingual content that he's producing, maybe you could become a multilingual influencer or work a multilingual social media job. So I think it's showing students that there are, or prospective students, that there are different opportunities. It doesn't necessarily have to be the more regimented or traditional roles. And I think that's more appealing. So I think that's a way to bring in more students under the tent. So yeah, I think it's adapting with the times and meeting students or prospective students where they're at, speaking their language. So I think, yeah, definitely using examples that are not necessarily the traditional profiles that we've seen. But I think that opens up a larger conversation of how do our programs look and can we teach to those kinds of markets, right? And I think that there's still a place for more traditional job profiles. I just don't think that that's speaking to younger generations, but I don't think that that's just a product of translation and interpreting programs. I also think that that's speaking to a particular time, with the geopolitics. Like, I think this generation, these younger, the youth, they're constantly bombarded with information, right? Because they're always tapped in. And so I think the idea of working in a government context doesn't appeal to them. So I think they need to see some of the joy. I think they need to see, more creative outlets, and I think we can bring them in that way. I hope that speaks to your question.
Thank you very much. And we have time for one more question.
And students, don't be shy. I would love to.
Alexander, this is a student, right? Not particularly the student.
I mean, I will take any and all questions.
When I was a student.
Excellent preface.
I've read in one collection a phrase from some Slovak scholar, Števčík by name, I don't remember. And I've read the phrase that struck me at that time, Števčík. Józef Števčík, I believe. Yes, and I was struck by the phrase, what do we read? We read our experience. So it's very good idea. What do we translate? We translate our experience. So my question is, what sort of experience will have people who rely on artificial intelligence? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And that's something that I talk about with my current students right now. When we talk about creating rapport with clients and what we can bring to the table in the services that we offer, it's exactly that embodied and experiential knowledge. So I think the Hike Manitoba example is really good in that way. The fact that I had hiked the trails, that I knew that part of the world intimately, I think helped me translate that content more effectively. So absolutely, like I said, AI isn't sentient, and I will never be persuaded by the tech bros who say, AI is thinking or doing the thinking for you. Like, no, there's no thinking. There's predicting, there's probability, but that's not the same thing as sentience. That's not the same thing as embodied and experiential knowledge.